Hello world, Frida Reba Darcy and Patricia O'Connor here today on the Bonsai balcony. It is sunny Sunday, still looks a little hazy out to me. Whenever I look up, through the camera I see blue. Whenever I look outside, all I see is a blowout of white. It was kind of hazy to my eyes, but yeah. It is a pretty nice day out here today. It is short sleeve weather. In Alameda, California, next to San Francisco, and this is just a little quick scan over at our collection of bonsai trees. Today we're going to talk about these guys. There's not a leaf on them right now. It is January, mid-January. We'll say it's mid-January. And it's warm. It was warm yesterday. Warm today. It's probably going to be warm tomorrow. I saw some temperatures later in the week forecast near 70. I don't know. Asking ain't always getting. Let's see what happens. But the trees aren't sure what's up. But this is a good time to look. This is a good time to look at some of the prune back that we've done to maybe show some of the cutback that we've got going on, and some of the rhyme and reason to some of these choices that we've made. We've made choices to leave things where maybe things aren't normally left. What's with that? All of that stuff. This is just a little quick dive into our bald cypress compilation. This is 3 American swamp cypress or bald cypress, Taxodium ditchum, and these trees came to me a couple of years ago. I saw this one on a mailing list supplied to me by Bonsai Tonight. Every so often, Jonas will do a list of people that he knows who may have a few trees for sale, and they all kind of go in cahoots and do a list. And I saw this tree on there, and I jumped. The other 2 I ordered from a grower collector in northern Louisiana. He has some land up in there. He has some land there, and he harvests and makes available for bonsai enthusiasts, bald cypress, pygmy cypress, pond cypress is another word for that, which is a smaller version and slightly different foliage, and other things that you would see in that swamp environment. I'm drawing a blank as to what all of those are, but there are several species of trees that kind of live in the low-lying areas where they might be subject to flood and can survive that, while at the same time not getting the most light, because usually those areas are full of sun-hungry cypress trees. So, like in the same instance, it would fill the niche of a maple or a dogwood, except in the swamp parts, and it's not necessarily a cypress. It would be one of these other varieties, and some of them are beautiful and bonsai very well. So that's how I got the 2 outside trees. And the center one, I don't really have any history with it. I don't know if it was collected, although the way that it is buttressing, I was impressed with those buttresses. Let's just milk that shot for all it's worth right quick. I'm not crazy about that blunt cut on the end, but that's sort of on me. Depends on how I plan it or what I do with that in the future, whether or not we have to look at that. Also, this is something that I deliberately try not to hit with water, or this would have rotted away by now. If you have an exposed area like this, I've got another one right here, I make a point to protect those. It would not be unusual to see one of those in the swamps, to have that area rotted out. If I can get that to roll over, which is what it's doing, we'll go with that instead, and not have that scar. Although that scar is not the worst thing in the world that can happen to your bald cypress tree if you have one of those. Um, if you have one of those, or if you're looking at a tree and it has one of those, but then also has other pluses to it, I wouldn't hesitate. I wouldn't hesitate to pick up a tree or not, just based on that. So that's kind of what I would say about that. But at this stage in the game, I feel like I have say. So I'm always checking. I'm always going to look and see whether or not this is getting soft in here. This top layer is starting to separate, which tells me there's probably another layer underneath that, and I don't feel anything soft. I'm not one to peel back these trees much. There's a couple of rules. There's a couple of different trains of thought. One, if I were to go back and peel away all of this bark, and there's a technique for that, then I could end up with something that looks like this. And I could even clean this in such a way as to get some honey-colored, beautiful, beautiful looking trees. And I could probably do that to all three of them. The other rule of thumb is all on natural. And in this case, the center tree is doing something. That bark, you also see paint sometimes do that. And in the antique business or in the faux finish business, that is called alligatored. And I like it. It just shows the passage of time to me. It doesn't take a lot of time. This tree, such as it is probably around 16 years old. I've seen people claim that trees this size were old as the hills when they were probably basing that on the size of the base and, just the rugged looks of the tree based on what other trees would look like and how long it would take other trees to look like that. In this case, I'm the person who cut this wedge, and this wedge that was cut at that time went from edge to edge. I was looking at a bullseye of all the rings, and there were like 14 3 years ago. So this is a 17-year-old tree, no more, no less. Bald cypress can be impressive in just a few years, and it was probably about this impressive at 10 years, frankly. We have a roof overhead. All of our lighting is just what comes out of there. And this is still being the winter. The sun is pretty low in the sky. I mean, it is right in my eyeball, truth be known. But it just tracks right across there. And in the summer months, when the light would be bluer and the trees would be needing it more, it's more overhead. So we only get the sun blasting in this way when the sun tracks lower in the sky, and then in the summer when it puts out the bluer light for the trees, it's higher behind the eave. So that's kind of what necessitated our lighting these sun hungries. And they get to double dip. They get some from here and they get some from out there. But I think that LEDs are a wonderful thing, and this is coming from a one-time professional lighting person in film. But I think LEDs are a wonderful thing. Gone are the days where we don't have realistic choices or pretty choices. Speaking of choices, we went through here as the foliage was starting to die back on these trees, and I cut through. I cut everything back. I cut the branches back that we have been keeping for a few years, and I also cut back some of the branches that just came out this year. Maybe they fill a void that we were waiting for something to fill. So they don't show the vibrication of the other branches. While in other places, and that's by design, we'll see what comes. This branch is of a size that I would expect it to come back. Same with this one. I wouldn't expect to see that bud out spring, whenever we make it to spring. And then with that in mind, if we look at this top, this leader here, we have stuff that is kind of a no. That's technically a bar branch. That's technically a bar branch. Look at those choices right next to one another with all of those, with all of those, with all of those, with all of those. Those are, as far as design aesthetics, and you can see a really good example here. Those are bar branches, and then every other one would be, let's say, we would go with this one, cut this one, keep this one, keep this one, cut this one, go with this one, keep this one, cut this one, keep this one. You kind of see what I'm doing? But here's what, if I were to go through there and play that little game now, and it would seem like a good time to play that game, because you can see so clearly without all of the foliage what interrupts our cool little thing we have going. And while that is a tempting idea, I don't know which of these are actually going to come back. And it's all kind of like putting poker chips down on something and then waiting to see how it plays out. We should hedge our bet, and that's why you see all of these. I don't expect that in the amount of time I'm allowing these guys to linger, that they're going to cause us a taper issue, although eventually they would. But come spring, let's see what starts budding out. And those that don't bud out, we chop. Those that, if we have in this case both bud out, then we make a choice as to which one. We don't want to allow that to continue over a second season. We're about to look at a lot of choices, and if we prune one of those bar branches back, we'll probably get a lot more choices because of it anyway. So that's kind of the rule of thumb there. I've leaving myself options was the idea whenever we did our pre-back. Having said that, this is also, I did a little correction in here. I saw this, we've got some wire scars. Those will go away if we give it a little time, and if we don't like the amount of time it's taken, I could always do a little cut right there, and we could replace this piece in the right time of year. We could replace that piece in a month. And then we're just taking a little look at everything else. These guys, cypress trees, bald cypress, they're some of the oldest trees, species-wise, on the planet. They predate insects. Most of our coal deposits are either these or Dawn redwood, which were both the dominant species in early Earth. If you think about it, these guys have been around the universe several times, and humans haven't. Which is to say, our little ball is just going around the sun, but the sun is going around the Milky Way, and has made that path, has made that rotations a couple of times. And so these guys have been around the universe several times. The same thing can be said of sharks, but yeah, these guys predate fish. They some of our earliest fossils that we found are some of the leaf prints that we find in coal deposits were of these guys. They are majestic, they're beautiful, but they're just so primitive to Earth. In real life, when you stand underneath one of these trees, they are sort of an oasis unto themselves. The air is always fresher and cooler. Especially on a hot day. That's whenever they're their busiest. These guys have been growing here for me for a little over 3 years. It was one of the first projects we took on. I was told that bald cypress would be easy. I have been raised around these trees my whole life, most of my life, growing up in an area called the Golden Triangle. Little petrochemical part of southeast Texas. There was a lot of cypress trees and a lot of pines. And that was some of my first interest in bonsai, was seeing stuff like that. And wisteria, oddly, there was wisteria that had taken over in the woods around where I lived, which I kind of thought of that as a local thing growing up, but those came from Japan originally. They just got away. So I have found these trees to be extremely easy. As long as you can keep them watered, then you can supply them with sun. You can well and truly have some bald cypress. When it comes time to, you can defoliate these trees, and whenever all the foliage dies back, you can just simply go through really easy and just go zip, 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 defoliate these. And some people defoliate these trees in summer when they slow down to get a second flush. I do not defoliate my trees in July to get a second flush. Sometimes the foliage gets a little ragged looking during the heat of the summer, but we soldier on. I also don't do a lot of pruning on these trees unless I see something is about to become an issue, in which case then I go through and then I'll make a decision to eliminate something. Right now, where we're at is this tree needs to fill in and become this wide, and this rollover needs to encompass there. So what we need a lot of root development for that to happen. And that was a mistake I made. I've got this guy in some really nice, fine akadama, and I should have planted them in some rocky, chunky stuff so that we wouldn't have nice, refined roots, but we would have thick, huge roots, because we need to build thick, huge pieces. That was a mistake on my part I made 4 years ago. We're going to live with that. I feed these trees year round. You hear some people say that they feed their trees they don't feed their trees in the winter. We have some warmth here year round, and I see that most of my trees look to be still doing stuff all year. I see them raise up from where the roots are growing and are putting on stuff. So I just go ahead and feed them year round. Now, this is also a good time to look. Since we've been having this little warm spell, I'm gonna hone in on here, and then I'm gonna try to see what kind of focus I can get going there. Tracking lock, it says, but it's blurry as all get out. Let's hope it figures that out. What I'm trying to show you are all of those little bumps in there. That would be telling, that in itself would be telling. And what that would be telling is, this would be, whenever the tree from winter and we're waiting on spring to raise its head, the first thing these trees will do is all of those little bumps will begin to raise a little. And that tells us that we're just about to see buds breaking. And whenever you look and see the occasional bud breaking, it's like you might be looking at the tree for just 10 or 15 minutes, just going, what a nice, and then all of a sudden you notice a little green speck, and you go, oh wow, there's a little green speck. That little goosebump is, oh wow, there's another one. When you have one of those moments, that's the sweet spot for repotting these trees. What that does is it's not too late to repot them, and at the same time, you don't have to wait 2 or 3 months to see what's going to come of, its recovery is going to be built right into the next flush of growth, which is just about to kick off. Kind of like Pat kicking off the water bucket, and I like that water bucket too. So anyway, I was noticing all of those little goosebumps on there. It might very well be that these guys are starting to think that it's spring, and if I could show them a calendar and remind them that we're mid-January and that it'll probably take another cold snap between here and actual spring. May not, we've had warm winters before, but yeah, somewhere our days are already getting longer, so it won't be too much longer either way when we would be in our sweet spot to repot these guys. And no, I'm not going to repot these guys anytime in the near future. But if I had some bald cypress and I was looking forward to potting, that's when you do it. Whenever you start to see that first hint of buds breaking, when the first buds begin to break, and by the time they've all broken and are starting to come out, that's the window closing. Not slamming closed, but that's the window to repot these guys closing. So say those who know. So this is what we've got going on so far as our ramification is concerned. We don't see a lot of going up or going straight back, but as I mentioned earlier, we have left ourselves a lot of choices, and that's especially important as long as those branches are of a certain size. I'm pretty sure this guy will come back again, having hung out for a couple of years. Not so sure about any of these guys, and we are looking a little bare here, just like we're looking a little bare through here. So whenever I have a million choices, I'll let those ride and see who survives the year, and then we'll select down to those, and that's kind of how you do that. Also, when I got these trees, this one had just had its angle cut. That one had a cut straight flat across, and had two buds out like that. And I would end up 2 leaders that were kind of fanned out, and I swapped out both of those leaders in favor. Whenever I got a sprout coming up at the base of something that I felt was too far out, I would encourage that sprout to live, and when it continued to grow, I would start cutting back the old leader, which was way out here. And the same with this, and I'm still cutting all of this back, but at the same time, I'm allowing a lot of this stuff to come back. This is probably the branch I would keep. All of this other stuff you see here is just adding to our rollover and adding to the energy, and the more energy we have here, the more happens here, the more rollover we have here, then the faster that does. Also, whenever you start to notice rollover getting slow here, Bonsai, Cypress tree grower debonair John Gene Angel, I believe, recommends that you go in with a router or something and clean out the inside edge of rollover and make that green again, and that would reactivate that edge and speed up the process. But we're kind of like closing a zipper. We're kind of like zipping something up, and that's, if you had a time lapse, that's kind of how you would see that do. And sometimes we need to just go through here, and I've seen him do it, and other people do it with like a knife or a deburring tool, and they just start cutting away at this inside edge, and that makes it active again. I was wondering if doing that with Scotch-Brite or steel wool, just pushing it into that corner and sanding it out there, might not do the same thing. That was just my little thought. If you were a kind of person who was considering getting into bonsai, but sometimes you have to travel, or sometimes you have to be away for business, or life requires that of you, then the alternative to that would be to take your bonsai trees, your cypress trees, and put them in a shallow pan of water. Not necessarily submerge them, although I've seen people do that during the summer, but a shallow pan of water that would make sure that those roots stay hydrated. And as long as that shallow pan of water stayed when it takes all of those water, takes up all of that water, then you're running the risk of losing your trees. A bald cypress should not dry out. Should not let it dry out. It doesn't mind being a little wet constantly, and some people just leave them in water. I don't know that as a long practice I would do that. You see that in the wild, but in the wild they're also allowed to put roots down, way down or whatever, into a drier zone if need be. So I'm not really sure exactly how that works, but we have to keep in mind that our trees are in a shallow container. So that's kind of what's going on. That's kind of what's going on there. Okay, see what I just did? I hope you see what I just did. I'm not really sure I pointed at it, but that was this leader now. And again, come spring, if everything busts out, and this leader, for instance, as big as it is, died during the winter, that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. We would have a sprout up here somewhere, and that sprout would get wired and pointed straight up and become the new leader in town, the new sheriff in town. And then I would go through and put a wedge cut in there. And that's the beginning of taper. That's how taper starts on in hardwood. Whenever we're doing that, we basically just pick the next branch to be the new top, and put a cut, and then bend that straight up. And that's just how that's how this guy got to be the top of the tree. And that's how this guy got to be the top of the tree. And that's how this guy will be the next top of that tree. And every time we do that during the summer, we increase the activity. We'll release a lot of hormones, and that increases the activity that's going on up there. And we can see buds pop out along the way because of that. It's just whenever mid-June or mid-July, whenever everything starts to get the midsummer doldrums, it's not the worst thing in the world for me to top these trees a little and get a little action going whenever they just thought they were going to take a little midsummer nap. So that's a little tip I've got there. I've mentioned John Gene Angel. He lives in the Carolinas. He is a excellent bald cypress grower. He specializes mostly in the flat top design, and they sure are pretty, and they look very natural looking. I'm going for what will ultimately be a traditional formal upright design on these guys. However, I've pointed this out before, we're a couple of years away from really worrying about a final design. And at the speed at which these guys grow, I could probably wait 1-2 more years and then go, wow, I've just suddenly seen the light on that flat top thing. And it wouldn't be too late to turn these trees into those. At this stage in the game, even if I were going to do a flat top, I would still know that I have to create a lot of taper, and a flat top is kind of like a literati in a way, in that they are traditionally pretty bare until you get, maybe one branch or so midway, and then you've got that flat top doing one of those up at the. So you wouldn't want to spend years with the flat top design trying to do this amount of rollover. That takes root. This amount of rollover is going to take a lot of roots and a lot of foliage and a lot of wood mass to be accumulated. And where I live in California, these guys are happy. Pretty much all of my trees are happy. This guy is used to harsher, and I have to worry about it. I have to worry about it running into the ground. It's used to a 4-month growing season at a hellaciously high hellaciously high altitude. By August, it's probably getting snowed on. This year in October, 90-degree heat, that's just absolutely something where it was going, what the hell? So everything else is pretty much thinking that the bay is a pretty okay place to grow. These guys would grow faster in a hotter climate. They do fine here. I don't have to worry about a freeze here catching these guys off guard, because they can survive colder than what I think Alameda would probably ever throw at them. I'm not daring anybody. I'll behave. But as a rule, these guys, I've seen these guys ponds be iced over, and the trees were sitting there in their little frozen block of ice, and then come spring. But then they had roots that were way deep down in there, probably anchoring. They would have to. Usually you think of roots, and they're proof now that roots mostly, and most trees live in the top couple of feet. But these guys are going to have some taproot that anchor, or they just would not survive the weather that they're subject to. Let's see, what else about bald cypress? Water them to holy hell. They are a little tricky to wire. They're not impossible to wire by any means. You can see a couple of branches. This was an example of stuff that I wired before I decided to just mainly worry about clip and grow. This branch and this branch and some of that. I don't see a whole lot of others, but you can get wire bite. You can get wire bite really fast. If you're not paying attention, you can get wire bite really quick. And other than that, I would take let's look at this. I would take a branch that came out when this was in its infancy. It would be sticking up like that. So I'd put a wire around it, and I'd wrap it there, and then I would bend it down. And then within 3 weeks, I got to pull that off and move it to keep it from digging in and making wire scars. And if I took it off and didn't put it back on, boom, it would go right back to that. Once I finally got a branch to behave, like this guy, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, this guy will point back up again. They just do that. I did hear of a method that if you wait until late in the game, see, these have got a good, nice set of levels. So that should be a good lesson as to what we can expect if we wire these branches down a little, as opposed to just letting them go straight up. But I could also put a wedge cut right here. Just put a wedge cut right there, and then put a little piece of wire on it and bend it down, or put a guy wire on it and bend it down to close that wedge. And I hear that will give you level on a branch that's like this, and it's sustainable. So with that in mind, I thought whenever we come to our final design, I'm not going to worry about what's level, because I'm not yet still in a final design phase. Every one of these branches could be swapped out for something better in the couple of years that we still have ahead of us growing these guys. Now, if I lived in Houston or New Orleans or Mississippi or around in that area, Florida, I could expect some, or the Carolinas, like John Gene Angel, or like Florida, let's say Weigerts. If you were looking for trees, the two people that I've mentioned so far both sell bald cypress trees in various stages of growth. John Gene Angel does a course, and it's a several-day course, and I think he might not still do this, but I'm pretty sure he does. And at the end of the course, you end up with a really nice bald cypress bonsai tree. He also does crepe myrtles and stuff too. And speaking of crepe myrtles and stuff, Weigerts. The example that I looked at of a bald cypress in in formal upright style was one that is in Weigerts in Florida. That's a bonsai nursery, and a YouTube video where they do a tour of their garden. He also shows the different stages, the sizes of trees that they sell, and very, very impressive. So that's a good source of information, and that happens to be where I got this El Grande mica training pot. So yeah, I ordered that from the fine folks at Weigerts. Let's see, that's that. They are very tolerant. They're very tolerant of heat. You can flip these guys out a little if the heat just shoots up unexpectedly. They can wilt even if they're watered. A good idea would be to water them anyway, because the water in the pot might be the same temperature as the ambient. And if you can cool those feet down, that might be great. Otherwise, these guys can, if you get them in a situation where they overheat, and they're high heat hardy, but it still can happen. It's weird because their foliage will drop and they'll be in shock, which means they're not moving water. And while they're not moving water, that foliage is just cooking. And there might be water there, but it's not picking it up. And it might need a couple of days to pick it up. And if you haven't found a way to cool that tree, and then in that time, that foliage will all just wilt and get hard, and you might even see dieback of the little things that also won't be able to necessarily hang out during that hot part of it. Ooh, that's got that. Flat tops are what most people in the United States like to do when it comes to these guys. I'm just kind of going over my list of the things that we've done. I haven't made a lot of mistakes yet when it comes to these trees. One of them I made is staring right at us. Here. If you see a piece of bark, you see that piece of bark there? That little gap right there. When I got the trees, there was one of those, and I grabbed it and peeled it. And I've been looking at this scar now for a couple of years. Finally, this knot shows that this is bark, but it's still not bark on the same level as this bark. This is bark underneath that started healing from where I peeled that back and created a scar. At that particular time, prior to this, I wasn't sure if I wanted to help the trees peel their bark and polish this and get a honeycomb surreal look out of these guys, or whether or not I wanted to allow them to keep their bark and let that stuff just get all gnarly and do all the stuff that it does. And messing with that when it was right here and creating that said, well, all things being equal, let's don't mess with it. And I pretty much like that decision too. I like the implication of age and years that goes with having bark on these guys. I think you're better off if you're gonna mess with the bark. I think you're better off peeling up than down. If it starts getting deeper, stop and cut it back in such a way as to create a way for it to stop, rather than just gouging out the trunk of the tree. When you have bare spots like this, if you do not want them to rot out, this is soft wood, and if you don't want them to rot out, don't hose them down when you water. I kind of do this. I don't just pour water to that. The point at which I started noticing this was soft and this was soft, I stopped hosing this part of the tree down with the watering can and just kind of did a little dance like that. and keeping that covered is a good idea, and probably covering that a little better would not be a bad idea. Say that same. I don't know if you can see that speck. I always say we're at sea level here. We're 4 floors up from sea level, so I always joke and or probably halfway serious that might very well be where this guy came from. 5,500 feet might very well be what we just saw there with that flyover. That noisy little flyover. That's Goddess. That's my little ramble on ball cypresses. These guys grow fairly fast. If it was hotter here, they would grow fairly faster. They're very rewarding trees to grow. To my way of thinking, you don't have to have a finished bonsai out of these guys to have impressive trees. I have very much enjoyed my time growing these trees. I think they have been impressive and a nice addition to the look of our balcony, even in the state that they're in, and when they are full of foliage, even more so. So, yeah, at some point, this could change, but at some point, I see myself planting these guys in a shallow rectangle of about the same width and length as they are now, but it'll be quite a bit shallower, and because these guys go bare, it could be glazed and have a color. I'm thinking green, like the color of a pond, that has this film on the top of it, or that alligator grass, whatever that stuff is. Anyway, that's just kind of my thoughts on bald cypress. They are very much rewarding trees to grow. They are pretty easy to grow. I feed these year round. I water them year round. Yeah, like and subscribe if you guys haven't already. Our next post will likely be midweek when I'm not even sure what we're gonna do yet. I haven't gotten a schedule yet for the next couple of shows that we're gonna do. I usually kind of come down with some notes for the next several shows. And since we got through with our 4-parter and then a little bit of follow-ups, that was about all I had on the books. We're going to do some, but we know what we have coming ahead. We have some repots of those little pines there, and some repots of those little pines over there, and we can also wire some of those guys. So yeah, that's what's going on. Like and subscribe if you guys have not already, and we will do our midweek drop. I thank you, Frida. Frida thanks you. And thank you all so much for watching.